Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Kim, and I'm delighted that you are all here to listen to a very special person in my life, my first grade teacher, Mrs. Sadye Petersen Reddick. So I've known her for years and years. This is her daughter, Leslie. And I've known Leslie for years. And then you have another daughter, Cheryl is here also. So welcome to all of you. Let me just give you a brief background. Sadye Petersen Reddick is a member of one of Dixon's founding families, the Petersen family. She lived and taught in Dixon for over 20 years. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Spanish and a lifetime teaching credential from UC Davis. She is a writer, poet, and spiritual consultant, and continues to teach English, citizenship, Spanish, and art to students every year. At the River, her book, takes place between Dixon and Rio Vista and is dedicated to those who love a good story and desire to learn historical truths about the year 1848. So with that, I welcome Sadye.
Thank you, Kim. This is such an honor to be here and a real pleasure. And I hope that I can get through all this. There's so much to the history of Dixon. It's quite fascinating, pretty complex too. And when I start a lecture or a talk or teaching, I love quotes. So I'm going to read a quote. In our lives, change is unavoidable. Loss is unavoidable. In the adaptability and ease with which we experience change lie our happiness and freedom. And that was written during the life of Buddha, 563 to 483 India, a long time ago. But boy, it still holds today, and it's kind of the underpinning of my book. Because the change that these people went through, the Californios, was a disaster, and it only took 2 years. 2 years. It was really, really rough. So let me see what I've got here. Okay. Now, this just is a little comment on the ending of the Californios with their loss of land was not in my novelistic control. I had nothing to do with any of that in my fictional story. Because the ending for my characters was not the only one possible, and I insisted on having a happy ending. I don't like to read books without a happy ending. Okay. Now, she gave you a little bit of my history, but I was raised on a sheep ranch, very isolated, no electricity, no telephone, and no neighbors, except the Basque family that worked for my dad. The isolation led me to become an avid reader with an appreciation for language. Now, believe it or not, I was 7 years old before I started school because there wasn't a school. And finally, my dad got a country school going, and I don't know how I learned to read, but I was reading everything right away. And it was all stimulated also by living with, working with, and teaching immigrants all of my life, which gave me a love of the children, families, the culture, and the music. Now, until 7th grade, I and my two sisters rode horses to a country school 4 miles away. And it was a school, we had a magnificent teacher who gave me a love of learning that never ended. I went to University of California, Berkeley and Davis. And she told you what I did. I became a primary teacher, reading director, reading specialist, early childhood tester and trainer. And with my background personally and academically, a BA in Spanish and lifetime teaching credential, I taught many Spanish-speaking children every year. And I offer the only remedial reading class in Spanish for the bilingual classes. And I developed a complete testing program for reading skills in both languages for the teachers. Now I've got 5 kids, and Leslie and Cheryl are here today, 2 of them. I'm a grandmother, great-grandmother, and great-great-grandmother. That's hard to believe. But I do remain very active. I'm involved in 2 writing groups and a poetry group and a Spanish conversation group. And I love teaching. That's what I came to do, is to teach. I've also illustrated 2 books that are published. And I kind of wanted to show you, because the cover of a book, when you go into a store, what draws your attention? Usually a cover, if you're looking for something easy to read or quick to read or no special history story or something, but it's the cover. And it's important that it is appropriate. Leslie, would you raise up the book under the blue box? The first one I did was for my daughter Yvonne, her twin. And it has 52 concepts in it that I had to devise all of the concepts, the images to match the concept. And I did it in bright watercolor because that is what is appropriate for children. And it's a parenting book, but it's for children. And I'll just quickly show you, I'll just open it up somewhere and show you what it's kind of like inside, because Yvonne and her son took this to Peru. Oh, well, here's one. I am accepting, and then it has a little text there, but you see how I did it. And that was appropriate for children, but for my book takes place in 1848 and 49, and that didn't fit my book. I wanted something that fit the timeline and more of that kind of atmosphere. So we came up with this cover. And these represent parts of the Californio's life. And this is the Californio. And the river behind is the real river. It's a real river. And it's the river. Leslie, you want to get that first yellow? There's 2 of them. I got some pictures. I had no way to get to a store to enlarge them because we were snowed in. Yeah. But here are some pictures. And it is a real river that borders the north side of our home. I mean, our ranch that we don't have now, but I grew up on. And in my book, I discuss the wildflowers that come across the land It's not very much in the book, but it is there. But every year, can you hold it up so they can see there? There and there, and they go for miles, miles from 113 all the way east to Liberty Island Road. Hard to believe, but they're gorgeous and beautiful. And then I put on these papers, you can look at them afterwards, or if we have a break, because I put some examples of the sketches I had to do. It was a heck of a lot of work, but I had to do a lot of research and just sketch things, you know, how I was going to use them, you know, in my book. Yeah.
Did a lot of work.
And then there's a map for the river. Can you hold that one up? Or give it to me because I want to put my finger on it. The river. And when I was growing up, we just called it the river or the slough. Going out to the river, going down to the slough. And the grandkids would say, oh, we're going out to the campground. We're going to go out and have a barbecue or something. And then one day I thought, the river had to have had a name, but what? Well, Dixon Library tried it and couldn't find it anywhere. Rio Vista tried and couldn't find it. The California State Library couldn't find the name. And I was telling my son about it on the phone, who's sitting right here. And he said, oh, Mom, I know the old name of the river. And I nearly fainted. So anyway, here's a map, and most of you probably, here's Dixon, up here, you can see it. Here's Rio Vista. This is the Sacramento River as it goes up. And just past Rio Vista is where the river comes off the Sacramento River and goes west. And I don't know what it's been doing with the drought or anything, but it used to go almost into the Jepson Prairie area, down there past Campbell's. And of course, this is Highway 13 today. And this is Highway 12 to Rio Vista today. But these will be up here if you want to look at them later. Now, I would like to, oh, Leslie, would you hand me the one? Hand me the one, that's the forward. I had a beautiful forward written for my book, and it brings up a point that is really missed as people read the book, because it's not something that we really think about. And I'm only going to read just a few parts of it, just a little bit. And if you're writing down questions, save them so that you can ask me a little bit later. This was written by Eduardo Ortega. He's an engineer with Caltrans, and he is the writer. And he's been a friend of our families for years and years and years. He writes, Sadye Reddick has managed to write a book that combines history as a stage, where the At the River story takes place. Historical fiction is not an easy genre, as both the historical and the fictional components must weave in seamlessly. Even more difficult, Mrs. Reddick managed to write the story from the opposite points of view of the early inhabitants of California that were part of the Spanish colonial empire, and the point of view of East Coast people who belonged to the United States of America. The people that more or less 70 years earlier had been in British colonies ruled by the King of England. I lived in Latin America until I was 18 years old, where I learned the history of the Americas under the Spanish colonial era. Once I moved to the United States, I learned the history of my new country. In her narrative, Mrs. Reddick expertly switches between Spanish colonial life and early Anglo-Saxon culture points of view within each character seamlessly and on the fly. Few persons can detect that her historical and cultural facts of the colonial life are spot on, and that she was burdened to provide parallel historical narratives that were culturally correct. She did it very well, since the average reader from this country will have no problem identifying the East Coast values brought here from the United States citizens of that era, but might not realize the counterpart cultural values from the Spanish and then Mexican periods that are described very accurately. I must repeat, this parallel description of cultures was written superbly. And that's a part that's not easy to do. And I think it's because my life just led me in that direction, because for 15 years I lived with French Basque family, and I learned the love of language with them, and then moved to town. But when we moved to town, my folks didn't want us kids around. They wanted to move in easier. They sent me to Winters, where I stayed with a family whose best friend was Lopez, and from an old pioneer family in Winters. And I first got introduced to the Spanish language there. And even they were invited me to a pig that was cooked underground on Pewter Creek on the bank. And so I got introduced there. And then when we went to high school, we moved to Dixon. I had to take Spanish because I wanted to go to college. So the teacher was wonderful. She was really interesting. She danced with the opera in San Francisco, and I got to see her dance in the opera Carmen, listen to her stories, and I just loved the language. And then I moved to the ranch when I was married, and had 3 little kids in less than 3 years. And we had Basque workers from Spain, and they were just wonderful, wonderful men. They were just hardworking men. They were extremely respectful, but I didn't have much time to talk Spanish with them, even though they all spoke several languages and they were not educated at all. And then I got very ill and almost died. So I had to have somebody come way out there and help out. And we had Sophia came from Juarez, not a word of English. And that's how I started getting into the Spanish language. And living out so isolated and no electricity and all that stuff, I could relate to the Californios because they had to be completely self-sufficient. They, every land grant or the small ranchos had to provide everything they needed for themselves. You just didn't jump in your horse and ride around the corner and get a quart of milk. So I could really relate to that kind of living, because when we went to town, we never ever let the car get below half a tank of gas. We had to have extra food kept at home because we flooded out a lot down there. So it was very interesting to me. And then living with Sophia for 4 years and learning Spanish, it was crude, but I could make myself understood. So I decided to go back to the university and really learn it and become proficient in it. And there is where I had a little professor from Chile, and he was teaching, he lectured and everything, and then one day he stopped and he started talking about how the Jews and the Moors were kicked out of Spain, and how they had to learn Spanish, they had to become Catholic. They had to leave, or it was a death sentence. And that was under the edict of expulsion. And we were going, whoa, you know, I've never heard nobody taught me that in history. Not in the Spanish history or the English history. And I thought that stayed with me. And that led into my book. And I think Faye's still listening, I hope. She helped me write in the Jewish part, because I had to write it in as how it would really affect these families, these Californios. And right today, it's a very contemporary problem, and it has started in basically New Mexico. But they had to escape from Spain. Now, there were some that changed their names to things like that, like trees and rivers and things like that. And I thought, my professor's name is Castillo. That's castle. I'll bet he had to have ancestors that were Jewish. And that stuck with me, and it really stimulated me to get that into this story. How would they handle that? What happened to them? How did they live with it, or did they? And over the generations, most of it was forgotten, but there were traditions and things they did that they still did. They didn't know why they were doing it. Now, in my story, the mother knows. Excuse me. So, anyways, there's if I can find it here. Oh, just a second. Oh, okay, I have to look it up here. But anyway, I have to find a lead to get all of my points and my themes that I want to get through in my book. How do you do that? And I tried to do it through this family and how they reacted, and through the dialogue, and how did they react to all these events, and how did they even find out about them? Was there any communication in those days? No. There was nothing. So that was a big problem. Let me see if I can find it here. Formal, sure. I think I had it all fixed here, but I hope you can bear with me. Anyway, the boys, there's a family, and there's two boys and a girl. The oldest boy is 30, and he will inherit all of the property, everything he will inherit. Do you know why? Because it's called the primogeniture law. And that meant the oldest son inherited everything. So sometimes it worked out well. If the family is united, and other times, of course, there were problems. So that is a consideration for this young man. Okay, that's not it. I've got all these stickers in here and I wanted to say that those boys had seen a chest when they were little kids. And one of the boys, the younger brother, had played with a ring that he loved, but he got caught at it and got into deep trouble and the chest disappeared and until we have a dinner party where I'm sorry, but you know how you're always looking for something and you can't find it and it's right in front of you.
Is it this
Um,
page?
no, that's not
No,
it.
not
What chapter is that?
This one.
I don't think that's it. It's,
This thing.
oh, that's second. That's the second one. Okay, what page is that?
177.
Oh, okay. Let me see.
You want the dinner party
Yeah,
or the
well, they haven't, they, oh, yeah, okay, what page?
166.
165?
166.
Okay, well, they have a dinner party, and they have guests, and they have three cattle brokers. One's from a Basque from Spain, and one's from Los Angeles, and another one's living in Yerba Buena. Who knows Yerba Buena? You know what Yerba Buena means? It's mint. It's mint, and the mint got there because of the mission. Most of the Padres that came with the were botanists. They brought all of the trees and the plants and stuff that they could bring wherever they went. But at the dinner, this is a Friday night dinner, and I have eaten Friday night dinner with Faye, who's up here listening somewhere. A very beautiful dinner. And this one young man, Marco from Los Angeles, takes part in parts of it, and the mother is realizing that he must have a background in Judaism, and it really frightens her. So that's a kind of first introduction to put in there. And then Edgardo, the second son, is very aware of that, and he has contact with the young man. And then he remembers the chest. So he goes to look for the chest. And he finds it. And then he takes it back to his room, but he forgets to find the key. And he has to go back and look for the key. The key was in plain sight. He lifted it out, turning to go back to his room. Now the older brother is Jorge Luis. Jorge Luis stood in the doorway, hands on hips, stiff, with jaws clenched, watching him. Edgardo was speechless, but not Jorge Luis. What the hell are you doing stealing from mother? I ought to beat the tar out of you. Okay, Edgardo, out with it. Let's see what you took. I haven't stolen anything. It's just a key. Come with me to my room and I'll show you what it goes to. And I'll explain what I suspect. You're crazy, you suspect. What are you talking about? You've crossed the line this time, little brother, said Jorge Luis. But as he followed him, his anger subsided into, anguish. I don't know how much more I can take. Papa, why did you have to go? You were my backbone. And now this? Here we are, said Edgardo. Come in and sit down on my bed and shut up. This is not going to be easy to get through that thick skull of yours. I'm sitting, now start talking, and this better be good. So Edgardo pulled the chest out from under his bed, and Jorge Luis's eyes widened and then narrowed in puzzlement. That's just an old chest of papa's. What are you doing with it? Did father ever let you see what was in it? Asked Edgardo. No, I only saw it once. He never mentioned what was in it, and I never saw it again. Okay, I'll listen. This will be some story, I imagine. So then Edgardo starts explaining how he kind of caught on to all of this and everything. And he talks about Marco, who was Jewish. And then Jorge Luis says, he interrupted, Jewish. This has something to do with being Jewish and knowing a lot of our ritual. Give me a break. That's nonsense. You, brother, were too occupied with keeping an eye on Cecilia, going after Prudence to notice anything. Now don't interrupt, but listen. And so he talks a little bit about it and mentions cemetery. Their old headstones had the star, oh boy, the Star of David on them, but nobody, they just thought, well, he's gone to the stars, right? So finally, I've heard enough, said Jorge Luis. Open the damn chest. Hold on, you're making me nervous. This is an old key, it's rusty. Hey, Susie Maria, said Jorge Luis, you're slow. You're making me nervous. What if we get caught? There'll be hell to pay, and you and your cockeyed story. What if it's all stupid and not true at all? I got it, and he opens it up, or he starts to do it. Jorge Luis sat up straighter, tensed, took a deep breath, and said, Por favor de Santa Atocha, open that chest. Edgardo pressed his hands down on the top of the lid and turned to look at an obviously impatient brother. Maybe mother should do this. Now I'm feeling like a thief. We shouldn't be doing it. But he does. He opens it. And so then you find out what's going on and what's in it. And they decide to go out to see what their mother's going to say about it. So they found the ring that Edgardo used to play with when he was a kid until he got in trouble. And the ring, and these are real ring today. It has a beautiful silver cross on the top. And then it opens up to a gold Star of David. So anyway, they are going out to the chapel where she is praying there. And her name is Aldiana. Aldiana was kneeling and praying in front of the altar. The mid-morning sunlight shining through the windows bathed the statue of the Virgin Mary and Aldiana in spectacular rays of sunlight and shadows, creating a look of divine love from above. Aldiana was deep into her prayers, was startled to hear someone entering the chapel. Looking over her shoulder, she was astonished to see her two boys. They've never interrupted me before. What are they doing here? She started to get up, pulling her skirt up so not to step on it, when she saw what they had. Where did you get that? Oh, God, help me. She murmured as she doubled over and fell unconscious on the floor. So that's how we get into all of that part of it. And it carries through the entire book. Now, one of the ladies in my Spanish conversation group came up to me and said, Sadye, I'm so glad you wrote that book, because we're a Basque family and speak a passable Spanish. And she said, we're from New Mexico, and we just had our DNA done. And guess what? 25% Jewish, and they never, ever had a clue, never. So it was a big deal. Anyway, I've just got a couple maybe odd questions. On the documents in the Sierra, the mining documents, what was the legal name, legal mining document for Mexican Californios? Well, that's pretty bad. Greaser. Legal name. And the heroine in the book from the beginning is called a heathen. And that word was still used when I was young. My uncle, Donaldo Francisco Gomez, was born in San Francisco to an old pioneer California family, and his father was a priest from Spain who was a chemist. And he's told us, he said, after breakfast and the boys were all ready, there was 5 boys, and they'd go out to play with the kids in the neighborhood in San Francisco. And the mother would say every day, don't play with those kids up there, they're heathens. And I never forgot that. Oh, and it's a big deal. And it goes into the historical, cultural aspect of it all. Now, it's difficult to understand the concept differences between the people that came from the East, from the United States of America, and the missions, people that came up to us, the missions. Now, I'm sure you've all heard of Father Sarah. Did you know that he was head of 14 missions in Baja? Yeah, 14 of them. He originally was a Spaniard, very, very tiny man, sent to Mexico within the church and to Baja, and ran those 14 missions. But he also was the head inquisitor of the Inquisition. And all of the padres in the missions were trained in the methods. So when they came into California, all that came with them. And that is what brought so much fear for these families that knew back in the old days, then knew they were Jewish, and they had to hide it, and then they lost it. Because back then in Los Angeles, there was one man burned at the stake. And in New Mexico, there was one man burned at the stake. So it was pretty difficult for a lot of these Californios. I mean, just think about living like that and being afraid. And the mother was really good Catholic. They all were. But yet, that one thing, they didn't know if the padre in here ever found out, how would they be treated? How would they react? There's a lot to think about that. And then the other thing that occurred, of course, was the gold rush. But California was annexed in 1846, and at that time, Pico, who had been a governor, well, there had been a whole list of Mexican governors. I mean, just one after the other. But anyway, he stopped the big entrance fee on ships coming into the harbor. $600. No wonder they had few ships come in there, because the missions were under the presidio. Each presidio, and there was 4 presidios, had to manage 4 or 5 missions. And Spain was supposed to send a ship every year for supplies and money, etc. Well, one time they didn't have a ship for 13 years. 13 years out here in that totally isolated California. And Leslie, you want to show the orange map? I made a map of California. If you can see it now, you'll have to look at it later if you want to, but in red are all the missions, how they were built, and they were not built like I thought they should be built. You know, 1, 2, 3, 4, right up the coast. No, they were built all over the place. And then I put the presidios, there are just 4 of them to manage all these missions. I thought, why, people ask me, well, why didn't people just go, you know, over there? Well, so I put the Sierras in. Who could do that back in those days? There was no stagecoaches, there was no railroad, there was nothing. If you wanted to go from San Diego up to San Francisco, where eventually they had to record their property, how'd you get there? You walked, you rode a horse, or you rode in a cart. Now, once in a great while, you could maybe get on a ship and go up, but that was not too usual. So, and then on the Pacific side, you had the oceans. How would you, later on, once the gold rush started and ships started coming over, then they could go around the Horn for 6 months trip, which all of my great-grandfathers immigrated to California during this era. And a couple of them, one of them wrecked off of Mendocino, didn't go home. And the one that came here was an orphan, raised by family, and he came by himself all the way around the Horn and San Francisco. I don't know how they did it. I really don't. But anyway, this map shows where the missions, and you can look at it later if you want. Let's see. Okay, then nobody knew what was happening. The only place that they really heard much was sometimes with the rumors in the cantinas, because they would have a way station here and there to get from San Francisco to Sierra for the mines. But once they all found out about the gold rush, well, San Francisco at that time had 812 or 10 people living there. That's all there was there. This whole Northern California only had 4,000 Californios. You know, it's hard to grasp that today. Only 4,000 people. That's not hardly any. So when the gold rush started and they found out about it, the population in San Francisco went down to almost 0. People just headed for the hills. It was a problem with the haciendas and the ranchos, because a lot of the young men just took off and they were left shorthanded, couldn't get their work done, and every single landowner, large landowner, hacendado, was responsible for the self-sufficiency of the whole group, everybody. So what happened? I mean, it was really difficult. That part was difficult. And then you had in my book comes in the real villain, and he is a land management agent. And So the government is demanding that everybody that owns property has to record it. It has to be recorded. And so they had to bring in their documents. Now, since there is no communication, how did they let people know? They put posters up under full foliage trees, so you could hardly see them at all. They put them in back alleys. Nobody could see them. And what Indian ever had a concept of land ownership? Nobody. Now, as far as their documents, old documents were no different than our old ranch documents. You know, you start at this tree, you go to this creek, you walk some feet, and just ask Steve about that. He had to work with all those old documents. So they had to be absolutely correct. Now, if I can find it, I was just going to read you a little bit about that. I'm sure what is saying. That's at the end. Oh, what is this for? Just a second here again. 33. Okay, so this guy is going to come to the hacienda and have lunch and meet these people. And he creates a problem before he even gets there. But I'm just going to start where they are going to sit down and eat. The family, the two boys and the daughter, and the heroine who does a lot with them, have decided they're going to be real careful, be very polite, and because this is a big government agent, right? So, and the mother doesn't really know what's much of anything, and Aldiana kept busy with Teresa, the cook, seeing that the lunch would represent the family status and impress an important agent of the United States. So that's what they're going to do. Now, they all gathered outdoors under the grape arbor and introduced themselves. It was warm, but pleasant in the shade of the lush grape foliage and full clusters of immature grapes. Nevertheless, most everyone felt a bit tense sitting down together for lunch, except Austin. Austin was the agent. He was in his element, a powerful government agent and a conqueror of this new land. He was here with a family of means, one he hoped to gain from eventually. Doña Aldiana, what a delightful outdoor place to eat and a perfect day for it. Look at all the grapes you will have soon. I imagine you designed all this grandeur. He said, speaking in understandable Spanish, while looking deep into Aldiana's eyes with an ingratiating social smile, which was not missed by the young people. Oh, thank you, Austin, she said, surprised to hear him speak a fairly good Spanish. But she would never be presumptuous and ask why. We do love it out here and want you to enjoy it too, she said. She sat up very straight, looking quite regal in a light cotton summer gown of soft ochre color. She turned to Ava, who brought out, she was a servant and brought out food and stuff. Austin was impressed and gave the servant a big smile, intensifying his eye contact, etc. That's the kind of person he was. Okay, then I'm going down. Now, the boys start talking about how important it was that the family was and to respect women and all of that. They're trying to really get this man on the right track. And Austin could see that Jorge Luis's dialogue was aimed right at him, and he took it as a warning. He could easily see that Prudence was Jorge Luis's. Anger pushed his thoughts across his mind. I never let that stop me before. Thank God I speak a good passable Spanish, even though it is a Texan Spanish. That mestizo doesn't know who he's up against. I'll show him who owns this country now. So then they're just kind of talking about things, etc. And how important it is for a wife to be with the husband and so on. Now the mother was listening to that home talking to women, etc. And Aldiana was somewhat taken aback by the direction of the conversation. She had no clue as to why they were discussing all this. Was there something she didn't know about Austin? She sat forward and listened, forgetting to continue to eat. Austin felt subtly attacked with his back to the wall and thinking, I'll have to be careful with these people. They aren't ignorant peasants. I might have to find a way to give them a good scare. And he thinks about that. So then they just go on this light conversation, but the mother hopes to change the conversation and move to a safer subject. So she was trying, but it didn't work. And Jorge Luis just decided to jump in. Say, Austin, the Treaty of Guadalupe de Hidalgo guarantees our land titles. How do you see that working? Asked Jorge Luis, trying to modulate his voice. Yes, we hear all kinds of rumors and have real concerns, said Edgardo. He suddenly leaned forward, putting his weight on his elbows on the table. That brought a strong look of disapproval from his mother, which he ignored. It was all he could do to not reach over the table and grab Austin by the neck. Prudence wanted to verbally lash into him, but held her tongue. Senores, I am not familiar yet with that treaty. I'm not sure it's valid since the United States won the Mexican War, and I have not heard any decision about it, said Austin. The hair on the back of the necks of the two Sandoval men stood up, and their breathing became tighter and tenser. Also, I've been told, said Austin, Mexican grants often seem to have vague boundaries and make sure and other odd types of irregularities. We'll have to check into each grant and make sure all of them are correct and legal. He nodded authoritatively with his last statement. Looking at Jorge Luis, he found it impossible to believe he was the owner of such an outlandish amount of land. You arrogant, backward Mexican, just wait till I pull you into an American court. Jorge Luis and Edgardo built their whole life and their family's stability and hopes thinking. Edgardo looked down at his feet and sighed. Jorge Luis simultaneously felt numbed and angry. Aldiana spoke up authoritatively. We have been here for 4 generations. That should make us legal. She lifted her head and looked down her nose at him as if asking what right he had to question her family's ownership. Unfortunately, Senora, it's much more complicated. He felt disgusted and bored. Besides the irregularities of the old deeds, besides that, we have a population explosion, he said. More than 60,000 people have arrived here just this year, and we expect more every day. those gold diggings act like a magnet. And most people want to stay and have their own land. We have to check all grants for occupancy and improvements too. Witnesses must be found. On top of that, everything's being changed. Most likely, the Department of Land Management will be held in San Francisco instead of Sacramento. Sir, said Edgardo, a problem has developed with people called squatters. They're moving onto our land and refusing to leave. There have been a couple of shootings. How do you plan to solve that? Since these people are Americans, I would think that you, an American government official, would have these people immediately removed, said Prudence, shifting in her seat. Her voice had an underlying tone of hostility. She was horrified. She couldn't believe he was an American. He was an embarrassment, and she was becoming angrier and angrier. Prudence had come from Maine. That is a problem, said Austin, throwing up his hands. I do admit that. Unfortunately, we have our hands tied. Those squatters don't respect the laws and don't care. They say no one needs that much land and they have a right to some. Okay, so then little Fiorella asked, what happens when you do find something faulty with a claim? Even though it might be something simple, like a little mistake, she asked. I'm afraid the landowner must prove his innocence, said Austin, looking Fiorella straight in the face and gesturing with his hands, as if he were saying that's just the way it's going to be. And if the person who made the mistake is dead, asked Jorge Luis, I'm afraid it's the same. You must prove innocence. I know it might be impossible to prove. Another thing, he said, even if your land has confirmation of title, that doesn't mean it will be accepted. You may have to defend it up to 5 or 6 more times. The words 5 or 6 more times were heard repeated around the table. Okay, what are the 5 or 6 other agencies we may have to deal with? Asked Jorge Luis, more than disgusted with this example of a government official. Now he was wondering about Austin's 2 colleagues. Will they be as power-seeking and nasty? We need to be very careful with this guy. I can see now how much power he does have, and he likes to wield it. Austin pulled out of his thoughts and sat back in his chair, stretched his legs, and began. There is the Board of Land Commissioners, the Surveyor General, Land Office, again the District Court, and there is the Supreme Court. And that's what they were up against. And on top of that, Austin says, in any case, I do hope you can get all your deeds and documents in order. Furthermore, whoever appears to defend the property in the courts must speak English. The judge doesn't speak Spanish. And who in California spoke English? Anyway, that's what they were up against. And all of you, I'm sure, know the name of Vallejo. Governor General Vallejo. Let's see, last thing I had a paper about him. Let me look there. Anyway, he was a very highly esteemed man. And he owned tremendous, I have it right here, a tremendous amount of property, that parts of San Francisco and below, and then up in the Sonora areas. And he was born in 1807. So he was a Californio. And he was hauled in front of the courts, just like everybody else. So how long do you think it took them to get his property?
Lifetime.
He was hauled into court 17 years till they broke him. Then they left him with, the Sonoma part that's a historical area. Now, does anybody know why the missions were sent into California in the first place? Okay, so right up the coast of California is Fort Ross. And that was the Russians. So the Russians were there. And then on the border of Oregon were the Brits. And the monarchy and the church got really worried about keeping California, even though at that particular time it was nothing. And the Presidios, what could they do? They had no army. They only a few men, and their workers were a few convicts that they brought with them. And the Presidio in San Francisco, I describe it here because the father had been a military man there. So when it rained, the thatched roof fell in on them, the men, and the floor ran with mud because it was dirt, and they had no heat, no anything. So it was pretty rough. And there was, they were responsible for all these missions, and so that created a big problem. There was a lot of contention there, etc. But anyway, they decided, the monarchy and the church decided that they wanted to protect this country. Now, California was the farthest frontier country of Spain. How much land did Spain really own in those days? 1/2 of the world. 1/2 of the world, and a huge amount of the states. But that was the reason they wanted to keep California, because the government of the United States had offered 2 or 3 or 4 times to try to get California, and Mexico refused every time. And then finally, the states annexed it from the war, Mexican War, but so that's why they started to come up into the missions. The missions were the cheapest way to do it. To send the military people was very hard to do, but to send the missions, they were more self-sufficient, and they had plenty of native labor. And so that's basically why they came up. And it was difficult because the Russians, Fort Ross, they were Christians. So it was not a good picture. But anyway, what time is it? 4 o'clock?
We have until 5, so
Oh, I thought I had till 4:30.
you can, and then till 4:30, and then we can take questions.
Oh, okay. So Leslie, want to hand me this next paper? I think that's the one I want. A lot of people ask me, well, how come you wrote this story of all things? So I thought about it, and so many people ask me that. I thought about it and realized that while I wasn't aware of it, life had been preparing me, leading me, and later pushing me to write it. And I did talk a little bit about the ranch and growing up with the Basque family, and then the Bascos from Spain, and Sophia from Mexico, and then when I went back to the university with the kids and everything, I did that all in Spanish. So I had wonderful professors from all over, very interesting people. And then when I went to work, they always gave me lots of kids who didn't speak English because I could work with them and I could help them and teach them. And so I developed a wonderful relationship with the kids and the parents and all of that, everything. Let's see. There was a couple of things that happened though, besides the professor talking about the Jewish hidden Jewish legacy. Let me see if I can find it here. Oh, okay. It was interesting that when I retired from the school, I joined a writing group in Davis. It was just a memoirs group, just writing for fun, no editing, no criticizing or anything. But it was an amazing coincidence because the hostess was the wife of my first Spanish professor when I returned to UC Davis after the twins were born. And because I studied with him first, he was very organized. I always knew what was expected of me, and any tests or anything were immediately returned, which didn't happen with a lot of them. So it gave me the start I needed and the strength back then to stick it out for 4 years. And what a small world to be working with a man who loved the language and taught it. And then I had an incredible experience. It was when Pir Vilayat Inayat Khan, international director of the Order of the Sufis, who came from India, spent a weekend in my home. And when he was a beautiful, beautiful man, I can't tell you. When he was leaving, and as his driver started to drive him away, he looked out the window at me and said, "Your destiny is Spanish." I stood there dumbfounded, watching them disappear down the street. That was 51 years ago. Pir Vilayat did not know that I spoke Spanish, and there was nothing in my home to suggest anything Spanish. I realized then the importance that the Spanish language had always had for me in my life, and I knew it would continue. And then I watched a Mexican movie with a famous actor playing a strong macho role. And I wondered, could I write and capture a character like that? Could I do that? And so I tried it, and I took it to my group and I read my character study to them, and they really liked it and gave me good constructive criticism. This was in a different group. The leader told us to expand and develop our character. The character and the time period captured me, 1848 and 49. So my story began and metamorphosed into a book to my great surprise. I had no intention of ever writing a book, but looking back, I could see how everything I had learned and done, it all led to doing this. It's kind of interesting. And the other thing, and I have a book I put up here on the table called Ramona. Now, maybe some of you have heard of Ramona. And Ramona was made into a movie. It's made into a beautiful song. And I saw the telenovela Ramona. And yeah, and it made such an impression on me. And I learned a lot from it. And I used that a lot in my research too, the book. But the movie also stuck with me. It's all these things kind of came together when I got into the book. And the book, writing the book meant research. And the more research I did, the more I thought, oh my God, I didn't know that. Nobody told me that in history. That's appalling. What's going on here? And it just kept driving me more and more to get into it. And the family became alive for me. My background, I think, was a lot of it, growing up on a ranch. And my grandfather was trained horses, and we would go watch him in the rodeos where he would do the rope tricks and the whips and all of that, and also my uncle Donaldo, Francisco Gomez, Uncle Don, he was a veterinarian. And he had a ranch, and he also did the bullwhip tricks and all of that. And he would tell stories all night, and all those things kind of just came together for me and helped develop a lot of these characters. Also, the Bascos that lived with us did, because of the characters that they were. They were just very, they were big partiers for sure. But they were very upright, steadfast, hardworking people. And all of them, when they left the ranch, became very successful, very successful. Nick Fagawaga went to Elko and built everything up there. He owned, oh my gosh, and he was a great carpenter. His brother owned the Silver Dollar casino or hotel up there that we stayed in one time. And the third brother went back to Spain and became a cattle broker all over Europe. They all did. And so that helped me in developing these characters, because they all come out of that background. The colonialization went on, in the Americas for how many 100 years. And they were all subjected to the same traditions and the same teachings and our family things. And so it all just kind of fell together. And then I found it fascinating to compare the background of the American ancestors. Is so different, so totally different. And one of the big conflicts was that when the people from the East came out, or Midwest, they could not grasp why the Californios needed all this land. They didn't understand how much land a cow needs for grazing. And they had no idea of the isolation of the haciendas. They were far apart and not that easy to get to. Whereas back east, you got in your carriage and you could go for a while in your little town and buy what you needed. I mean, it was just a very different, I guess, kind of a clash in a way. But to understand the difference in thinking. And one hard thing for them was that there were no fences out here in California. All of the thousands of horses and cattle and were free range. So anybody who needed a horse, if their horse got tired or whatever, needed a horse, you just took one and rode it. You just took a cow if you needed it, and that was it. That's what they did. Not when the Americans got out here. A lot of unfortunate Indians got hung because they didn't understand that they were not horse thieves or cattle thieves. And I deal with that in my book too. There's a part of that. It's in the book. I wonder if
We have some questions.
Okay. Now, did people write down any questions?
And a bunch.
So do you want me to read them to you or do you want to read?
I don't care. Go ahead and read them because I'm
Okay, if I can.
only got one good eye here.
Okay, so the first question is there a reason you didn't have, I think, is it Austin or Austere taken to San Francisco and Shanghai?
Yeah.
Yes.
Austin was the government official agent. No, the one that had that happen was a different person. That was an interesting one to write. Oh, my goodness. Because everything I wrote, I had to figure out how did they solve that or handle it back in 1848? Not today, back then. And I wrote that chapter on domestic abuse because domestic abuse is that's in every culture goes back to the beginning. So what would they do? How would they do it? And that's what that. Read the book, and you'll find out.
I'm almost to the end. Okay, and the second question is, what was the name of your primary school teacher in Dixon who was also a dancer?
Oh, that's not a primary school teacher. That was my Spanish teacher in high school. And her name was Rose Benes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
How many had Rose Benes? Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating lady.
Excuse me, I hate to barge in like this, but this is so relevant to what you're just talking about with Miss Benes. I don't know if you know it, but Miss Benes' family was Spanish that had to convert
Oh, I didn't know that part.
Judaism
Oh.
to Christianity before they came to this country. And I found that out when I went to the services at the Methodist Church. There were
Oh,
members of her family there, and that was part of the eulogy where they talked about the family maintaining that thread
mm-hmm.
through generation after
Yeah.
generation.
Yeah, somehow a lot of them were able to have that very subtle connection, not lost totally, but pretty close. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I really admired her. She told us lots of stories, and she worked with Rita Hayworth was Mexican, and her father was a well-known choreographer for the movies. And she had worked with him. That's about all I knew, except dancing with some handsome man on the Adriatic shore. She talked about. Yeah, she was quite a lady. Uh-huh.
Okay, next question. What type of lighting and fuel and lamps would there have been in 1848?
Well, how about candles? And that was part of their big product that they sold. It was the no, not the candles, the
Tallow.
Kerosene?
yeah, the tallow, yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Big part of it.
Yeah. Okay, another question. What happened to the Californios after California was annexed and later became a state? Did they stay and look for work, or did they move elsewhere?
Well, it was everything. The majority of the Californios ended up in 2 years' time in dire poverty. It's hard to understand, but there was one woman, and she's in one of the books over here that I used for research. She owned 2 ranches and another piece of property. And she gave her life, she never married, she gave her life to helping people and working in the missions. And she ended up when all this occurred, living off of other people with friends. Because everything was taken. It was really rough, so they, some left, some went to work as peons or whatever. I mean,
found work where they could.
how to survive.
Mhm. And how were the California families selected to receive land grants from Spain and later from Mexico?
Well, that was different too. Some of them, if they were military and they retired, they were given some, and I don't know, some of them bought it with money. Gosh, there was another, so now a little bit toward the end later, they could petition for the land. There are different ways. But in my book, and I don't go into that part of it, except the father did get part of his land from the military, but
Are there other questions? I know some made it up my way, but we can take questions from the audience.
I have a couple.
I have a question.
Oh, yes, yes, we can take from the chat as well, or from the Zoom.
Okay, did the other person want to speak first? This is Faye.
Okay, you go ahead, Faye. We have
Okay.
your.
Okay, my question is that this book seems to be so salient and not covered in the public school setting, in the high school setting. Is there any way that this book could somehow be included and as a study in history for the young people who don't know about this history? As a textbook, in the public schools, because often these things are overlooked.
well, I don't know the answer to that.
Well,
Maybe somebody out here would have a contact, or I don't know. But I do know that but when I started to write the book, nobody knew anything. They never even heard the name Californios.
Yeah, well, one of our missions here at the Historical Society is to teach Dixon's prehistory. And so, what's nice is we're getting the word out about who the Patwin are, because we still have Patwin and Dixon, same with the Wintun, the Californios, just talking about descendants of the Californios who still live here, when the map looked very different, when Mexico, went almost all the way up to Sonoma, Sacramento area. So that's part of what we're doing. And we're also collaborating with the local schools. So maybe little by little, we can plant this seed and, make sure that history from all perspectives is taught. Yeah. So.
Well, there is quite oh gosh. Leslie, would you turn on my boom box?
Oh.
And then I want to say something. Okay. Now, it has to be number 6. Is that correct? I'm only playing one song.
Okay. And the power
And then I know
PD,
some more questions.
and then, wait a minute. Oh, it's not so, wait. 1,
Oh.
2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Okay. All right. Now listen and see if any of you recognize this. Don't touch it. Just leave it. Okay, this is, I have 2 CDs done by descendants of the original Californios, and they are quite an organized group in Southern California. And Leslie, you want to hold up I have a cookbook of theirs. No, the cookbook. Just that one. The cookbook, and then this one over here, the piano music. Yes, I have that. Let me see if I can show you a picture. They are very active down south. Can you see it? Oh, bueno, okay. Now, I was teaching and this a couple, and I thought I'm gonna try to see if they're how they do in translating something to English. And I was in a terrible hurry. And so I thought I need something real short. So I grabbed this book and I thought, oh, that's just a little short piece, right? I didn't read it. I just, I took it and I thought, Levántate, joven divina. Oh, that sounds nice. What a nice title. That'll be great. You know, raise yourself up, get up, divine young lady. Well, doesn't that sound nice? So we started to translate it, and oh my goodness. And it goes, get up, divine young lady. Oh, it pains me a lot to take away your dream. You will see that your dueño, meaning your husband or lover or whatever, borracho. And he's drunk and he's passed out and he's on the street. I'm just dying of embarrassment. Oh my goodness. But they were really sweet. They laughed and we had a good discussion, but oh, I'll never do that again. Really, yeah, they're very active. So I think sometimes people forget there aren't any Californios, right? No, they're all here. The descendants are somewhere, not down south, very lot more. It's different down there.
May I ask a question about the Basque community from Spain? So did they come down to Mexico and then up through Arizona and California?
Well, they came in all different ways too, but the Basques that I was talking about were during my young lifetime.
Okay.
Because they worked on the ranch and they lived with us for 12 years at a time.
Okay.
But the Basques were from all over. New Mexico had lots of them. Otherwise, I can't really tell you. The 3 brothers that were with us, well, we had others too, but they came from a little town in Spain called Lesaca. They were all, all from the Basque country.
Did they go through Texas as well?
No, they came straight from Spain. That group did. Now, any other Basques, I don't know, because I was working on this book and referring to my experience.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And I think, Bill, you had a question.
Yeah, you mentioned that you went to grammar school that your father started.
Yes.
There, and would that be the Eggert School?
No.
ERT?
No, it's called Canwright.
Okay,
Canwright.
where was the Eggert School?
I don't know that one.
Okay, And something else, I did some research in the Tribunes, and you said you never had a telephone out there.
Mhm.
Well, Peter Tim and Henry Petersen, they put phones out there, and what they used for the phone lines was the barbed wire fence. It worked good in the summertime, but in the wintertime, they had trouble. But barbed wire was used at one time.
Oh, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah,
Well, my dad eventually built a phone line 6 miles. He had to build it all by himself. And then when the north wind would blow or something, the lines would get all tangled up and you never knew who you were talking to.
something else that should be mentioned is the Germanic people, they kind of married, you know, when they came from Germany, they kind of all conjugated together. And the history is that the Buck, B-E-U-C-K
Oh,
sisters, one married Harry Petersen and the other one married Peter Tim.
Well,
And they
the-
both lived out there and they were gonna subdivide the property and make a killing. Well, Peter Tim got flooded out, so he came back into Dixon. So that was the Tim and the Buttes are
Well,
cousins.
they were always pronounced Boyk. Yeah, it was always pronounced Boyk.
Boy.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Uh-huh,
Yeah.
yeah.
B-U-E-C-K.
My grandfather's cousin came out from Germany, a Boyk, Hans Boyk, and he lived with us off and on. Spent his last years at the ranch with us. An extraordinary man.
Oh, where was that school, that grammar school? And how many years did it last?
Oh, it didn't last very long.
Yeah,
It lasted till I went to 7th grade. And then I had to go into Rio Vista for 2 years. Mhm. But it was a wonderful experience, wonderful experience. I mean, there was only like 8 kids in it. And we did everything together and I mean, I can't tell you how much I learned. And I learned the love of learning and I mean,
you know what killed the country schools is the kids grew up, and if there was no other kids of that age, they could not support the school.
Right.
So they went to a further away school.
well, ours went into Rio Vista because that's where the ranch was down south.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a wonderful school though, and a wonderful experience. We had a teacher who was amazing. She started teaching at the age of 16 years old, and taught boys bigger and older than her. And we went, when she was 85, we went to a camp with her, my family, and we were family friends until she died. And you could give her a leaf or a piece of bark or something, and she could tell you everything about it. I mean, she was an amazing woman. And all 3 of her children became teachers.
What was her name?
Her name was her name was Ida Robbins. Clark at one time, but Robbins.
Wow.
Yeah, wonderful family. Quite an experience. And I rode my horse to school 4 miles every day and back.
How far was the ride?
4 miles. And we walked to school and coming home, you had to have your lunch pail and anything else ready. And so I rode bareback. I never had a saddle. So as soon as my leg went over, pow. We were home fast. Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any questions about the book? It was fascinating to write, and it was hard to write.
The Historical Society has some here.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you.
And yes, if you wish to purchase a book, you can have our special author sign it for you.
Oh, I'd be glad to sign it. Mhm.
Kim? Oh,
Yes.
excuse me. Sorry for interrupting. This is Fern. And I did have a question about the book.
Yes.
Hi, hola, Miss Sadie.
this? Hi.
This is Fern. And my question is regarding the ring. Has Sadie ever seen a ring, the ring that is the gold cross underneath? Oh, actually, I'm sorry, the gold star underneath the silver cross on top. Has she seen one? And if it's not a family secret, was it in her family that she had seen one? And then also, who was the person who had mentioned to her in her real life, actually, this is not regarding the story, that Spanish is her future?
All right, number one, the ring is a real ring, and the person that has seen it is Faye, who is on Zoom. Okay, I have not seen it, but she's the one that has seen it. And then, what was the other question?
Who was the person that told you
Oh.
Spanish would be your destiny?
Pir Vilayat Inayat Khan. He was the international director of the Order of the Sufis from India. And I had the honor of having him in my home for a weekend.
Fern, I can answer your question if you want it answered. This is Faye.
Hello, hi Faye.
Hi, this ring was found in Toledo, Spain. I actually went into a jewelry store and I asked them if they had any Judaica, and the jeweler came out and showed me the ring and said that he'd been trying to sell it for years and couldn't find anybody to buy it. And I recognized it immediately as a ring that had belonged to a hidden Jew family. And when I opened it up, it had a small section in it that the couple cut a piece of their ketubah, which was their marriage certificate, and put it inside the Jewish section of the ring. And I have that ring in my safe. I bought it in Toledo, Spain, years ago when I was traveling. There are very few of them in existence.
Oh my goodness, because Toledo, they're known for their I don't remember the name of it, but their is it silver and gold medal? They do jewelry and such, and I don't remember.
Yes. This is a sterling silver ring, the one that I have with a cross on the top of it. And when you open it up inside, it has the Jewish ketubah in it. And you can see jewelry like this if you go to Jerusalem and you go to some of their museums. And in New York, there is a Jewish museum. You can see some of this jewelry in their museums where they talk about the hidden Jews and the converso Jews and the history of the Jews that were forced to live under Catholicism, but they actually practiced Judaism.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. Thank you.
You're
Faye.
welcome.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, because Toledo used to be the capital at one time, and you had Jewish people, you had Christians, and you had Muslims all living in great harmony. And
Yes, many of the Catholic churches that had been synagogues were changed into Catholic churches, and then today they have been transferred into Muslim temples. They've been changed 3 times. When you go to Spain, you see the effect of the architecture and how it changed when you go on tours. They show you the changes.
Mhm.
Let's go.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
I'm ready.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
thanks,
so
Faye.
interesting. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
I had about 20 different themes that I wrote through the book, and one of the themes has to do with, well, like the quote I quoted on changes. How do people change under these circumstances, and what happens, and can they make enough change to survive? And so I deal particularly with the mother, because she's older and she's the matriarch and tradition, you know, and you have to marry right, you got to marry the right person, etc. So that's all in there too.
And I love how the characters meet right from the start.
Oh,
And
I
just
was gonna
the-
read
the-
a little bit of that.
Yeah, it's really, it's very, you have kind of the drama, and then she says, oh, I must take a Spanish lesson. So there's these little bits and pieces of humor that Sadie intertwines in her book, and it's very, if you haven't read the book, it's just the way she just connected the history and wove that so beautifully into this creative and expressive story is just a masterpiece. I mean, and the amount of work and research that went into this book is, yeah, just
It was a
incredible.
lot.
Yeah, it's an incredible book. It really
Thank
is.
you.
And she did the illustrations, so it's yeah, very, very special.
Okay, I'll just start. The name of the heroine is Prudence, and she came from Maine, and there's a whole background story with her. Now she's out at the river, once again absorbing the sights of the solid oaks, the meandering river. Prudence realized the heat really didn't bother her. Serenity wrapped her and soothed her soul. I will come here as often as I can. This spot is so peaceful and so inviting, and I need this. She patted her gun, which she kept at hand. I'm safe here. I'm so glad Uncle Lot made me take this big Colt 44 for the long overland trip. I definitely will come here again, she said out loud, feeling it too. Lowering in the late afternoon, the brilliant sun left long shadows of darkening contrast with the last holdout of strong light. Glancing around, Jorge Luis knew it was time to quit. He needed a break, and he could feel that his Peruvian paso, Santone, whinnying for a good ride. After he dismissed his workers for the day, he saddled up, mounted, and rode quietly for some time, relaxing into feeling one with his horse and the smooth, almost floating gait, the Paso Llano. Then he goes through a lot of thoughts and everything. So I'll read down here. Well, he wants to go out and check out the grazing situation, etc. And he sweeps his eyes over the vastness of the property. And in the depth of his being, he felt that connection of belonging, feeling one with the land, his family, and his heritage, deep roots. Okay, so then let me go over here. And a neigh sounded on the air, interrupting his thoughts. He pulled the reins, stopping Santone instantly, whose ears were rapidly moving back and forth in response. He calmed Santone and said to himself in a low, whispering voice, "My God, who could that be? The Indians don't come here anymore. A rustler? I'll hang that ladrón up myself, maldita sea." Full of anger, he hurried Santone forward. Alertness flooded his body and mind. He instinctively touched his holster. His mind and his pistol were at the ready. A few minutes later, he quietly and slowly rode down the long path leading to the river that was thick with oak trees, willows, and wild roses. He was almost holding his breath as he rode silently into the clearing. His breath stopped at a strange, sudden sight. He pulled Santone up short. A woman. He had never seen a woman out alone in the country. No woman he knew would dare. And she had ridden a horse. Dios mío, she's got a man's pants on. What an abomination. Jorge Luis was speechless. Meanwhile, a soft caressing breeze had been ruffling the leaves of the old oak and the tules along the bank of the river, masking the sound of advancing hoofbeats, whilst Prudence rested until a man on horseback was almost upon her. Prudence, startled, reacted by kneeling, grabbing her gun and pointing it directly at him. Jorge Luis stared at her as if she had arrived from the moon. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Not only was she a strange woman, but also a gorgeous one. Her golden long hair glinted in the sun. Her face was small, well-formed, with big green eyes that were focused right on him. Her gun was on him. Jesus Cristo, a Colt 44 Dragoon. How dare she, he thought. Then aloud in Spanish, he confronted her. But then I'll have to read just a little bit more at the end. Of course, they have to leave and she has to leave with him. It's getting dark. So they stopped. They both went up and stopped because she had to go down into the village and he had to go off to the hacienda. They stopped and prepared to part. Jorge Luis, in his slow and careful Spanish, expressed his farewell in a tone that was smooth and very polite. Don't go out there again. It is too dangerous for a woman out there alone. Anything could happen. Besides, you were trespassing. To himself, he added, why haven't I heard about her? Where did she come from? Facundo will know. And on her way, just before that, Prudence was wondering about him, that he rides his horse with ease. He is obviously a gentleman. I must admit, he's not only tall, but very good looking. I will find out from Facundo. He seems to know everyone. Looking him straight in the eyes and smiling, Prudence said, Gracias, Señor. Then in her clipped English added, I know what you are saying, mister. I will return there again anytime I want. I am not a servant to be ordered about. She turned her back to him, spurred old Flojo, and trotted on. She did not look back. He sat on Santone pensively, watching her until she disappeared into the village. Turning his horse, he headed home, unsure if he would share this unexpected adventure with anyone. His concept of women had been shattered. His comfortable and controlled view of his pastoral life that he had seen unrolling in his future began to crack, like the cracking of the soil dried by the heat of summer. He rode uncomfortably, with his feelings erupting and broiling from the shock of this unexpected encounter. His predictable world had, in one jolt, become unsettling and deeply unsafe.
Thank you so much for being here.
Oh,
Yeah, thank you so much.
well, thank you for inviting me. It's such an honor and a surprise, and
Oh, and
it's been fun and enjoyable.
yeah, we learned so much and about history and thank you all for being here today in person. And thank you to everyone on Zoom. We appreciate all of you that zoomed in, and if you're welcome to stick around and ask questions, visit with Sadye, look at some of the items that she brought today and purchase a book if you wish. And also feel free to walk around the museum and take a look. We also have coffee and snacks and water in the back, so just make yourselves at home.
Thank you, Sadie.
Just a reminder. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadie. I enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you so much. This was wonderful. Thank you, Sadie.
Thank you. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Kim.
Honor.
Gracias a todos.